Are you absolutely tired of wasting many hours not knowing how to start your research paper? Or maybe you have started your paper, but you're frustrated because you keep getting stuck. I have just the solution you're looking for. Hello, this is Dr. Mohamed Nouri. I have been an active researcher for over 27 years. I have supervised over 60 postgraduate students and doctoral researchers. I have written more than 200 research papers. I served on the editorial board of a number of prestigious journals. I also served as a technical editor of 2 journals. Over the years, I have brought in more than $15 million from federal agencies and industry in support of my research, and I have conducted research in a number of fields. In this short course, I would like to show you the strategies and techniques for writing an effective research paper. The course consists of 2 parts. In the first part, I will present an overview of how to conduct an effective research, and in the second part, I will show you step by step how to write an effective research paper. I hope you'll enjoy it.
Hello everyone, this is Dr. Mohamed Nouri with the course How to Write an Effective Research Paper or a Journal Paper. The course that I'm about to present consists of 2 distinct parts. In part 1, I will be presenting the basic steps that you need to follow to prepare for writing your paper. The outline of the presentation is as follows. I will first cover the context of writing a research paper or a journal paper. As I indicated, these are those steps that are critically important before you start writing your paper. The first step is defining the research question, theme, or the topic of what your research is all about. The second step is gathering the information and the background literature that are always needed for writing a paper, and they in fact comprise a significant part of any research paper. The third step is forming a hypothesis and an outline for the research that you have carried out. Then you need to summarize what you have done, your work, the result of your research. This includes the analysis, simulation, experiment, survey, data collection, depending on the nature of the research that you have done. The next step is organizing and interpreting the results of your research. Again, this is very important and is a critical component of the paper that you will write. In fact, this is what makes your research really stand out. Once you have completed all these steps above, then you are ready to start writing a research paper, which will be the culmination of all the research work that you've done in form of a report or a technical paper that you would like to submit to a journal or for other purposes. You can ask is your advisor or your colleagues or peers who've already published paper in reputable journals. Once you've accomplished these steps or fulfilled these steps, then before you start writing the paper, you really need to understand and as I said, the first step as part of the overall context of writing a research paper is defining the research question or the theme or the topic of your research. In doing so, these are basically the steps that you need to follow in order to be able to collect all your thoughts and all your work for writing a paper. Defining the research question means what you have really accomplished in research that you have done. And most importantly, what is it new that you want to present in this paper? The second important question, which is part of defining the research question or the theme or the topic of the paper, is you really need to know who is your audience. For instance, if you are a mathematical scientist, obviously your audience is different than if you are, for instance, a psychologist or an engineer. So you really need to know who is your community. And I hope that by the time, of course, that you have completed your research, you already are an expert in your field, although maybe a beginning expert, but you really know who your community is. The third step, as part of defining the research question, is what is the most suitable journal that you want to publish your work? There are so many journals, even in your particular field, but you need to identify what is the best and most suitable journal that you want to publish your work. Of course, it's easy to say all these, or it's easy to expect you to be able to answer all these questions, but don't forget that also you may ask for help. You don't have to necessarily know the answer to all these questions. But the question is who to ask for advice. If, for instance, you're a graduate student or a doctoral student, probably the best person you can ask is your advisor or your colleagues or peers who've already published paper in reputable journals. Once you've accomplished these steps or fulfilled these steps, then before you start writing the paper, you really need to understand and follow the journal where you want to publish your paper, what guidelines it has for accepting your paper. Each journal has a different set of guidelines that you need to follow. On top of that, you need to find out what is the review process, how long it's going to take for your paper before it appears, how many reviewers will read your paper, how long it's going to take for these reviewers to complete the reviews. There are journals that are extremely demanding and they're very popular and prestigious, and it may even take up to a year or longer between the time that you submit your paper and the time that the paper actually appears. You need to investigate all of these before you start writing your paper. You also need to ask others who have published, even in that particular journal. Is this a good journal? How is it being looked at in the community? Depending on what you want to do, or for instance, what your paper is going to be for, you really need to identify a specific journal that addresses or suits your needs. For instance, if you're a faculty member, a junior faculty up for tenure and promotion, most universities expect that you publish your papers in very prestigious journals in your field. So you need to ask your peers, your advisor, and those who have done so to guide you to find basically those types of journals. There are other factors involved. As I mentioned, for instance, if you're a faculty member in a university, there are different types of expectation for writing a journal, or the purpose of writing a journal is different than, for instance, if you just simply want to share the outcome of the research that you have done within your community. When you try to gather the right information and the background literature that are necessary steps for writing a research paper, one of the most critical and essential steps for doing that, you really need to locate prior published work. No matter how new your work is, there are researchers who have done work in related fields. May not be exactly what you've done, and you want to present, for instance, a breakthrough, but definitely you need to be familiar and familiarize yourself with the work that has already been published in your area. This part of your research and preparation for writing a paper is extremely important because it really sets the tone for presenting your work. How do you do that? How do you most effectively locate prior published work? There are many ways that, in fact, are available today. In my time, it was not easy. You had to go to the library, check out references, check out journals, and read through them one by one, make summaries, and so on. There was no internet, there were no Googles, and so on. But nowadays, with the available information technology tools, you really have advantage. My suggestion is, as a first step, you really need to check the homepages of those prominent active researchers for their most recent work. Those are individuals who most probably, maybe at least, reviewing your work that you submit to the paper. So find out what they have published recently, how it is relevant or related to the work that you are going to write, and also learn from their work, how they have presented that. There are also some very useful tools that are now available that are very powerful in locating literature that are related basically to your research or are within your field of expertise. One of the most effective tools that I have frequently used myself is a tool that was in fact developed through a major project funded by the National Science Foundation called CiteSeer. CiteSeer, which is hosted by Pennsylvania State University, is a very effective tool that helps you to specifically locate and identify those papers, as I said, that are relevant to your work through keywords, through their abstracts, and so on. In addition to that, of course, you can Google and also go on the websites of major journals, and by following certain keywords, locate those important papers that are really close to the field where you have accomplished your research and you want to write your paper. You also need to look at some of the recent proceedings of prestigious conferences in your field, or at least look at the list of the papers in those proceedings if you don't want to read them one by one, to at least find out what are the ongoing research that are very close to what you have done. And if any of those papers interest you, you can go and find out and maybe check it out or ask your colleague to send you a copy or somehow get hold of it. Also, you need to locate major review papers that have been done in your fields and other related fields. Literature review papers or review papers are extremely useful for writing and preparing to write your introduction for your research paper. Review papers are those papers that a researcher basically conducts an extensive survey of a specific research topic in a field. So they typically read anywhere from 50 to sometimes 200 papers, mostly recent papers, basically published by others, and then summarize the content of all these papers in a single paper. These papers are called literature review papers. These review papers are usually the type of papers in which established researchers have studied a large number of papers in a related field of research, and then they have summarized the finding of all these papers in a paper. In other words, these papers are an inventory of a large number of literature related to a specific field of research, and they're highly valuable and an extremely important and valuable resource for writing the introductory part of your research paper. That's why I recommend that you find these literature review papers and try to read those thoroughly, because they can really help you to identify those papers that are most closely related to what you are going to write about. To give you an example, I would like to refer to one of the work that one of my PhD students and other colleagues wrote a couple of years ago. The paper includes a review of a research that we did, which was in earthquake engineering or in the area of what I call seismic application. It involved use of a special kind of metal, which we call that nitinol, shape memory alloys. These are metals that they can absorb a lot of energy, and they're very useful for structural application. But the point that I'm referring to is that if you are looking for these literature review papers, what you need to look for in the title of the paper, it is the word of an overview, for instance. These literature review papers mostly include in their title the word overview or a survey or a literature review of such and such and such. Then, of course, once you locate these papers, you just read the abstract and see if the abstract gives you the information that you're looking for. As I indicated, these papers are a summary of a large volume of research paper published in the work related to your field or the field of research or what you want to write your paper about. So they are very useful, and you can, in fact, by reviewing them, find a large number of references that you can either read or just glance through and include in your paper as part of your reference. The next step or part of gathering information and background literature is that you really need to read key papers in the field. As I mentioned, of course, you can find these papers by checking out the website of well-known researchers and so on. The first time that you read these papers, you do not spend a lot of time to read those very thoroughly. All you need to do is read the abstract, the introduction, and the conclusion. And then by doing that, believe me or not, you can decide at that point whether this paper is related to what you want to write your research paper about, or should that be included in your introduction or the literature review section of your work or not. Let me give you an example. For instance, I like to refer to a paper that is related to my work. It is a very good, in fact, review paper written in recent years, and I found it very interesting. So as I look at this paper, this is what I would mainly look for. I look at, of course, first the title. As you can see, the title has the word survey. You remember the word survey? That means it is a literature review. Okay? So that's the first thing, of course, that interested me. In order for me to understand whether this is of any use for me or not, this is what I did. I look at the abstract, which, as you can see, consists of only maybe about 500 words. So it's easy to read and quick to read. The second part that I look at is the introduction, the section on introduction. Usually the introduction, as you can see in this paper, which is about 1 page or page and a half. Of course, this journal has double columns, consisted of about 1,000 words. Again, easy to read. And by quickly reading, in fact, the first few paragraphs of this introduction, you can almost detect the relevance of this paper to your work, or if it has no relevance. But I also suggest that you look at the conclusion part of the paper as well, because the conclusion also, in addition to the abstract, gives you a very good and quick overview what this paper has done, what the author's main contributions have been, and if there is a relevance to your work. So this is how I look at it, and how I review basically key papers, or in other words, what I presented is the first pass of looking at a key paper that you're interested in. So as I said, in the first pass of reading, you really should accomplish the following. Once you've accomplished finishing the first pass of reading, you need to be able to address or answer these following questions. What is the research problem that this paper really is attempting to address? You need to be able to identify that. The next question is, what is the motivation of the researcher who has published this work? What is the message that he or she is trying to share with the research community? Also, you need to be able to answer this question, that is this research work attempting to overcome the weaknesses of the existing approaches, or it is totally new, is a breakthrough, or it is not so important? All these questions are what you need to be able to answer before you can effectively write a good literature review as part of your paper. You also should be able to answer the question that what is it that is really new in this paper? Because that's the question other people will ask about your paper as well. Or how are the research claims substantiated? Are those results that the paper has presented really relevant or support the hypotheses that are presented in this paper, or they're quite weak and they really do not cut the mustard? The next question is, are there good conclusions and pointers for future work? In other words, is this work good enough that is worthwhile to continue that, or for others to continue that? You really need to be able to answer all these questions and think very thoroughly about each of these bullets, because by understanding these and comprehending all these themes and topics and questions and issues, you will be able to prepare your own paper with a much more critical view, and your paper will be of much higher quality. Nowadays, there are some very effective tools for organizing the references for your work and for your literature review. I highly recommend that you make use of the software tools that are available to organize your notes and references as you do literature reviews. Because as I said, when you conduct a literature review, you may end up reading 50 or 100 or even more papers. Especially if your paper is a literature review paper, you probably have to read maybe close to 200 papers. But the question is how most effectively you organize all these papers when you prepare the reference section of your research paper, or even how you tabulate in a chronological order and a logical fashion. You really find those papers that are most relevant to the work that you have done or you want to present. As I mentioned, there are many software tools available these days. The one that I have used, and I have found it very useful and user-friendly, is Mendeley. There are others, such as Zotero or SiteUlike, EndNotes, and so on. I would like to mention that Mendeley, in particular, has a very interesting tutorial video on their website. And once you register, of course, the registration is for free, you receive a PDF file with all the steps that you need to follow, and the directions on how to use this software, how to create your first reference or bibliography list. It also can find you all the papers based on the keywords that you identify, that you can easily locate and use them as part of your references, and so on. So Mendeley is a very, very useful software. Next step, as part of preparation for writing a research paper, is forming a hypothesis and an outline for the paper that you're about to write. You really need to develop a very thorough and good outline of your research findings. The work that you've done may have taken you a year, 2 years, or even 3 years. I mean, if you have, for instance, done a doctoral research, this work that you are going to publish may be the culmination of years of effort. If possible, when you are developing, or if you initiate the process of developing an outline for your research finding, you should work through simple scenarios and learn from other good published work. What I would highly recommend is you really answer these questions again. For instance, if your work is an analytical or mathematical or scientific work, you need to prepare a very thorough outline that includes, for instance, these categories: your mathematical model, the application that it may have in various fields, the computational efficiency of your work, in-field application, how easy it is, and so on, if it really is beneficial for conducting experimental work, and so on and so forth. So these are the questions you ask that would help you to prepare a simple scenario and an outline for your work. The next question that you need to ask for really before you develop and prepare an outline is, what is the chief strength of your research? You're the one who's done this research, so better than anyone else, and being honest with yourself, you can identify what is the chief strength of your research work. The reason this is important is because this will be your main selling point that you will be presenting in your paper. That is what you need to focus on, and that is what basically would excite the audience or the readers about what you have done. So you need to be very confident what it is that you believe it is the chief strength of your research. At the same time, you have to be very honest with yourself. You need to identify and understand what are the weaknesses of your research. And I'm sure, no matter how good your research is, there are some weaknesses. There are issues that you have not addressed. For instance, if you've conducted a very thorough survey research, or there are some shortcomings with your mathematical model, or there are some shortcomings with the device that you have developed. It cannot be used for all kinds of practical applications. So you have to be honest with yourself, and you need to identify any major weaknesses that are likely to hinder your paper. By doing so, you will avoid any major weakness, and by reworking on the findings of your research and what you want to basically publish. Also, you can turn that around if there is such weakness in your research work and identify that as a potential future research that others should follow. So in a nutshell, you need to both be able to identify your chief strength, which is the main selling point of your paper, and also the weakness or shortcomings of your research that are basically those areas that leave room for your research to continue or for others to continue your research. The next step of preparing for writing a paper is gathering and summarizing the analysis, the simulation, the experimental work that you have done. You need to categorize your experimental work, your survey work, your analytical, numerical, and research goals in a very organized manner. You need to summarize also the methodologies that you have used to address each goal and objective, because these are those steps that you need to elaborate in your paper and will form a very important ingredient of your paper that you're about to write. You also need to be able to basically, for yourself, address why were these objectives that you have selected are so important and why they were selected, what unanswered questions they have addressed. By thinking about these and thoroughly addressing these and summarizing and organizing all these information, you become better and better prepared for writing your paper. The next step is organizing and interpreting the results of your research. Again, you need to categorize your results and findings as related to each of the objectives that you have identified for your research or the objectives that have been part of your research. In other words, each result should be supporting one of the objectives or the key objectives that you have carried out in your research. You need to prepare a detailed interpretation of the results and your research finding. You also need to discuss how these results can advance the state of the art. You also need to make sure to discuss both the limitations, shortcomings of your work, and also the suggestions for further investigations. Once you have worked in all these areas, which I call the context for writing a research paper, then you are ready to start writing your own paper. All these steps that I mentioned are extremely important in preparing you for writing your paper, especially if this is the first time that you are about to write a research journal paper. Hello everyone, this is Dr. Mohammed Nouri with the course How to Write an Effective Research Paper or a Journal Paper, and this is part 2 of my presentation or this short course. What I will be presenting in this part 2, which is the heart of this course, is how to write a research journal paper or an effective research paper. As you will see, you will find this course extremely valuable, especially if this is the first time you're writing a journal paper or a research paper, or even for those of you who might be active researchers. You will find some of the tips and suggestions that I have offered and the structure that I have presented in this course very useful for enhancing your future papers that you plan to submit to a journal or for other publications. So let me start. The outline of the part 2 of this course or this presentation is as follows. First, I will introduce some of the important and preliminary steps that you need to follow before jumping into writing your paper. These are the steps that I say before you start, you need to follow, and as you will see, includes some general guidelines as well as suggestions that will really help you in preparing your paper. I will then present the structure and the function of a research paper or an effective research paper that really helps you to prepare a paper that would be organized and of the highest quality. The structure and the function that I will be presenting in a very specific and detailed manner will be as follows. I will present what the title of the paper should be, or how you select a title, and then I will present the structure of the paper in an organized and very detailed outline. This includes the abstract, keywords, introduction part, the methods, the results, the discussion, summary and conclusions, the references, and then at the end I will summarize all these steps and the guidelines and the suggestions and the teachings that I'm presenting in this course in form of a general outline or a template for writing a journal article, and I will make that available for free of charge on my website, so you can refer to that template next time that you're preparing a table, and hopefully that will help you with writing an effective research paper. And I will also present some final word of advice once you have prepared your paper and you have submitted that to a journal. So what are the preliminary steps that you need to follow before you start writing a research paper? Everyone knows that the goal of every researcher, active researcher, is getting published in a reputable journal or in a refereed volume or a publication that is highly regarded and valued in that research field. This is particularly true in the fields of science, medicine, and engineering, and specifically in academia. In fact, in academia, it is an expectation to publish, especially in a journal. In order to get promoted or receive your tenure, you need to publish, and in fact, there are expectations in terms of even the number of publications that you need to have in order to be qualified for promotion and tenure. So, not only it is exciting to publish, but sometimes it is even an expectation, depending on the field that you're in. However, having said that, it is true, especially when this is the first time that you're writing a paper, that writing a research paper can be a daunting task. You've done, for instance, a research work as part of your doctoral studies. You have spent many years. You've developed new methodologies, you have findings, you have data that they have developed, surveys that you have done, years of effort. The question is how you're going to put all of these in a concise manner in a single paper that you want to publish. What should be included in that paper? How the information that you also want to include should be conveyed to the readers. These are important questions to ask. And as I said, this whole process of preparing all that information for writing a paper can be, and in fact it is for the first time, a daunting task. My word of advice is that before you start doing anything, when you start just thinking about writing a paper, at the same time think about the journal where you want to publish your paper. Because the topic that you want to write your paper should be consistent with the focus of that journal. So you need to review the scope of the journal, and these, of course, information are always available on the website of journals, especially prestigious publishers like Elsevier. By reviewing those guidelines and, of course, suggestions and expectations that are listed on the website of these journals, you also find a lot of help that are needed in the preparation of your paper. Also, you need to find out which journals the researchers in your field publish their work. As I said, you need to do that homework simultaneously as you're also collecting all the information that eventually you will include in your paper. You also need to remember that writing a manuscript, although it's a daunting task, although it may come across as something very difficult, but it certainly improves like anything else with practice. Ask all those who have published in the best journals or who have a lot of experience in publishing. They would tell you that the first time that they were writing their first paper, they were almost discouraged and gave up. So don't be disappointed. As you write more and more papers, you will see that it becomes an easier task. And also do not hesitate to ask experienced peers to critic and proofread your drafts. Again, you will find that a very useful step as part of your preparation for writing a paper. Now that you have all that basically information or suggestions that I had, it is time to start preparing for writing your paper. The first thing you need to do, you need to have all the necessary information, everything that you believe it is important, everything that you have done as part of your research work ready. This includes the data that you have generated, the basically tables, figures, surveys, literature that you have reviewed, everything that you have done through the course of your research. You need to have them in one place, ready to be revisited and reviewed for writing your paper. This is particularly important when you have also a co-author. You need to make sure you collect all those information from your co-author if, of course, he has participated actively in the research that you have done. As a next step, you need to follow the guidelines that is offered, as I mentioned, on the website of publishers for the authors. So before going to the next step that I will be presenting on how to prepare your paper, let's visit the website of the journal where you want to publish your work. I mentioned, for instance, Elsevier. These publishers have very thorough guidelines and suggestions that really help you a lot. Let's take a closer look at Elsevier Publishers' website so you can see what kind of information you can, in fact, obtain from visiting those websites and how helpful it will be to you in preparing your paper. As I indicated earlier, for instance, as you can see on this website, they have a journal finder. A journal finder on this website helps you to find the journal that you are looking for from among the list of all the journals that Elsevier publishes, which of course they publish a large number of different journals. Okay? Then you will see that, for instance, in addition to finding a journal, there is a guidance on how to prepare your paper, how to submit your paper, and then once you submit it, how to check the status of your paper. Look at the journal finder. In the journal finder, as you can see, as it is stated here, Elsevier publishes around 2,000 journals in various fields of sciences, health sciences, physical science, social science, and so on and so forth. So you can imagine to find the right journal is important, and that's why a publisher like Elsevier provides that guidance to you. So you should really check that out and benefit from it. Then, if you go to the section on preparing your paper, as you can see that Elsevier has a very useful guidelines for authors. And of course, as it is stated here, each journal has its own requirements, so you need to really follow those requirements. In fact, if you click, for instance, on one of the documents that is very, very useful, preparing your manuscripts, you will see that they will take you through a very good video of how to prepare your manuscript so that it will be ready for submission to a publisher like Elsevier. And the preparing of your paper, as you can see, consists of a lot of parts and many questions that, in fact, are already addressed for you. For instance, how do I prepare my manuscript? How do I know if the figures are suitable for submission? How do I know more about the language polishing services, and so on and so forth? So you can see a lot of services are offered by each publisher that you should really take advantage of that. In addition to that, when it comes to submitting your paper, the same type of information is available. And also after you publish and you want to find out the status of your paper, again, you can go and check the step-by-step how you find all the information that you need. Another major task before you start writing your paper is basically the steps that I have outlined in the following. You need to spend the time thinking about the content of your paper. Remember, you have collected all your data, all your surveys, you know what models you've developed, what experimental results you have obtained, probably what conclusions you have reached in your research, all of that, which may be volumes and volumes of work. Set those aside, start thinking what the content of your paper should be. Once you've done that thinking, or the thought process is completed, you simply start writing down ideas in a very free form. Let's, for instance, give you an example. You have done a major research work that has looked into the impact of, for instance, some toxics in the environment.